Where and when did you learn about relationships and sex? It's not always a comfortable topic, but it is an important one. And through education, it enables young people, children, to make informed decisions. But what if you don't agree with what is being taught in schools? How old should children be when they learn about sex, for example? Well, teaching children about relationships and sex is important, and it's a mandatory part of our schooling system here in the UK. RSHE, Relationship, Sex and Health Education, is mandatory in all secondary schools, and primary schools must cover relationship and health, but can choose whether or not to cover sex education. My guests for this week's Life Issues are involved in running lessons in schools across the UK and the rest of the world. Welcome to the Life Issues podcast, Catherine Healey, Chief Executive of ACET UK, a charity championing healthy relationships and sexual well-being, and Paul Semakula, ACET UK's schools worker and training coordinator for London and the South. Welcome along to UCB One both.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
So, Catherine, starting with you, sex. It's a word that many parents, carers fear, but it's a good thing. I mean, as Christians, we know it's something that God actually invented.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, sex is great. And it is God's invention. And I think as Christians, we need to reclaim that conversation about why it's good and not shy away from it. I think, well, I know 50% of churches never talk about relationships and sex. And that's not just in the pulpit, that's in youth work or, groups in midweek. And yet we know it's the number 3 thing that kids want to talk about. And actually, there's an awful lot of adults that want to talk about it too, because as you say, where did you get your relationships and sex ed from? Most of us had a pretty shoddy relationships and sex education, if we had one at all. And the church has been one of silence and shame. If you grew up in the church, you will probably know that you mustn't do it before you're married. That is the thing that was drilled into me. And that's about it, really. But there's nothing about how the church is the bride of Christ, Jesus is the groom, about honouring, about obeying. People get all het up about, I'm not going to get married and obey. Why should I? But that's a distorted view of it. It's about thinking of the other person first, not thinking of yourself less, but thinking of them more. And a good relationship, it is, starts with a friendship. Whenever we're introduced, I think people always hear the sex part and not the relationship part. And the relationship part is key. I think we all grew up knowing not to talk about sex, politics and religion, which means that most of us got a really poor understanding of sex, politics and religion. And what we should have been taught is how to have a good conversation about those and how to be civil about difficult topics. And when we go into schools, we're not going in to win them over to our position. We're trying to get them to think critically so that they have a good understanding and a really good knowledge of the different facets of relationships. And then they can make wise and informed choices about sex. And I mean, if you are a Christian parent and you've got very strong beliefs about things and you're like, I don't want my child to be taught that, you have the option of withdrawing your children from sex education up to a certain point. But as I say, we don't want to not talk about it. I think you would far rather you told your kids about sex than the world does. You not talking about it doesn't mean it goes away. They are going to get all of their information from their friends and online, and we know where that leads. So yeah, my advice would be to start early, start young, when they're tiny. Talk to them about relationships. Was that a kind way to act? Was that good? Was that bad? And all of that, even sharing your crisps, offering, do you want salt and vinegar crisps? No, I'd rather have prawn cocktail. That's exactly the same as, do you want to go out with me? No, I'd rather go out with him. If we can negotiate and say things kindly, then we can go a long way.
We're going to explore more on how we have these conversations. Really looking forward to hearing both of your experiences, advice on this topic. But help us unpack a little bit more on the dangers of not talking to our children about relationship and sex at home, within families, within safe places.
So when it comes to talking with young people, and so I do a lot of parents' evenings. I've done a number of parents' evenings over the years. And I think parents are a bit apprehensive and nervous about having these conversations. We're in that weird, strange place where, for a lot of families, historically and traditionally, talking about relationships and sex is seen as something family does and not something that school does. However, knowing full well, doing this for a number of years now, families or parents or adults in that young person's life are not always having these conversations. I would say the majority of them aren't having these conversations. So it's important for families to be speaking about these things, because if they're not, somebody else is, and somebody else will. So it isn't whether your young person is going to have a sex ed. It's going to be about the quality of it and about the healthiness, if I'm going to put it that way, of the source of where the education is coming from. Yeah. There's lots of peer-on-peer education when it comes to this. And, their mates are as informed or as not informed as what they are. So we as the responsible adults in their lives who care for them, who love them, who want the best for them, should be having these conversations with them. Of course, we are talking about having these conversations at a timely, in a timely manner, and age appropriate is the key. Because when we say to parents, you need to be having these conversations, they're thinking we're going to be talking about all sorts of things. No, it's about, as Catherine was mentioning, teaching them really at their level, really basic conversations, non-explicit ones, especially depending on their age, with that younger age group, just teaching them about things about consent, about how to give and receive permission, about respect, about boundaries, respecting other people's boundaries as well as their own, so that they know basically if they're putting themselves or if somebody's asking them to do something which is inappropriate. So these are some of the reasons why it's very important for us to have these conversations.
And I want to pick up on how we do it in a moment, more about, like you say, Paul, on some of the advice around that. But picking up on the whole education in schools, I mentioned at the beginning that it is obviously mandatory in primary school to have relationship and health education, and secondary school education, it's mandatory to have relationship, sex and health education. But there are many parents who are concerned about what is being taught. So can you just help us understand a little bit about the differences between what primary school children are taught in schools and secondary school?
Yeah, so as you said, the curriculum is broken up into two parts, basically. So primary schools have to offer, and it's compulsory or statutory for them to deliver relationships education to primary age school children. In secondary school, it's both the relationships ed and the sex education that becomes statutory for the schools to deliver. However, in that sex education part of it, a parent has a right of withdrawal of their young person from the sex ed part of the curriculum up until 3 terms before they turn 16. And then the young person can opt themselves back in. So the type of things that are learned or taught in sex ed, which will be different from relationship education, will be things such as puberty, things like periods and things like that. What else will be taught? Online stuff. So issues around pornography will be taught, whilst relationship education is talking about friendships, it's talking about families, it's talking about who's safe, who's not safe. So those are the type of differences between the two. And if we're talking about parents being worried about what's being taught to their young people, parents can go to their schools and request more information about what's going to be delivered to their young person and what's going to be covered. So many schools, if they don't have already, if not all schools, have a form of or a mechanism to be able to get that information across to the parents. And most schools would have been encouraged or should have had a parental consultation time before they rolled out the RSE to their young people to get as much parent buy-in and that parents are aware of what's being taught. So in the overwhelming majority of cases that I have seen and the schools we've worked in and the schools we haven't worked in, children aren't being sexualized as such. I think a lot of those are the things that get the headlines, and therefore it distorts our picture about what's going on in most schools. I'm not ignoring or minimizing, the cases that have gone a bit over the line in some schools. So we do acknowledge that. But yeah, parents are the primary teacher of their child, so they can go to the school and request more information about what's being delivered.
Also worth mentioning that, you can go to the school and ask, who's trained those educators that are coming in, because we really want them to have got some sort of accreditation. Otherwise, what are they doing teaching our kids? We teach identity, relationships, biology, and technology. Really, those are the sort of 4 areas. So there's a lot we cover on self-esteem, on emotions, on body image, on what we look like in primary schools. It's about family, it's about parenthood. Why does my family look different to your family? Is that okay? Absolutely. So the romantic, more intimate stuff doesn't really come through till secondary school. And Paul mentioned about puberty. I mean, I am consistently shocked at how many kids get into secondary school and have no clue what is happening to their bodies. They don't know what this hair is. They don't know why they're suddenly sweating so much. Their hormones are going crazy. And of course, for the poor girls who are suddenly bleeding, they literally think they're dying because nobody's told them. So it's really, really important that parents are telling kids, early on, before it gets embarrassing, to say, this is what's happening. And also for the boys to know as well, so that they understand, listen, this is why your sister can't do sport or go swimming this week. And I mean, in fact, times have changed and we can, but often the girls are in pain, especially when it all first starts off. And then we teach, contraception and STIs and about HIV. But a lot of what we do now is around social media, sexting, pornography. And I think that's what parents are worried about, is we are over-sexualizing their children. But I can guarantee you that those children are seeing porn at an earlier and earlier age, and they're not looking for it. It just comes up, and that is being normalized. And that is the problem. That's what we need parents to do, is to call out that normalization and sexual objectification that is everywhere we look. It's in music, it's on the TV. And that's the thing that we really need to focus on, is that this isn't normal. This isn't normal. And this is not what you expect in a relationship. And, if you're in a real relationship, you can't just cancel them. There isn't a cancel culture. If you're on a social media app, you can block them and not see them. But when you see them in school, you can't just block them. You have to be able to resolve conflict and talk to people and discover that actually what they said wasn't what they meant, or what you heard wasn't what they said. And it's having all of those discussions, and the kids love it. I don't think there's a single school that we've been to where the kids haven't said, "Oh, it was brilliant. When are you coming in again?" And when they see us, they're always really excited to see us. And I mean, we teach a spiral curriculum. So some of those kids we see every year, several times a year. And, they know Paul well, and we'll say, "Oh yeah, I've got a question for you." And hopefully we can answer them. And that's what parents need to be doing, is just creating that safe space, so that young people will ask them. Because you think back when you were a kid, no way you're going to ask your mum, "Oh, what's oral sex?" or what does a condom look like? You're going to ask your mates, or a friendly adults. I mean, that's why we spend a lot of time advertising stuff to youth workers, because kids have great relationships with youth workers and are far more likely to talk to them or their teachers than they are to their parents. But that doesn't mean the parents get off scot-free. The parents need to be bringing it up and saying, "Listen, do you know what a sexually transmitted infection is?" Again, as Paul says, at an appropriate age. But it isn't just, like we've said, don't have sex till you're married. It's about, if you have sex, you could catch all of these things, as well as getting pregnant and as well as being emotionally involved. And are you really ready for that?
Laying out the risks and the consequences to our actions as well. We'll pick up on pornography, particularly how parents, families do engage in that very challenging topic. But just going back to what Paul was talking about, the right to withdraw children from certain areas of sex education. One area in particular I know is causing many families they find very challenging is the teaching of topics that they don't agree with, or if they are a Christian, for example, fly in the face of biblical teaching, for example, around gender identity. So how do you navigate that when we're living in a world where it's becoming more and more about identity politics and choosing who you want to be based on how you feel?
So the approach that we have at ACET, so our schools program is called the Esteem program. So the approach that we have is we don't focus on how can I put this? We don't focus on who is doing what or who is the people involved in whatever it is we're talking about. We focus on the topic. So when we're talking about sexting, when we're talking about contraceptives, when we're talking about staying safe or consent or anything like that, our main focus is how do we protect ourselves, whoever we are. And the underlying premise for us is that everyone is made in the image of God and everyone has value. And therefore, whatever demographic that person's from, we try to promote the ideas of mutual respect, treating everyone the way you like to be treated, the golden rule, and so forth. So when it comes to topics that parents may have a disagreement with or think differently from, I think that's a conversation we're going to be having with the schools, so that they are basically having that conversation and that there's some sort of, as best as possible, some sort of alignment. So that is how we approach things whenever we are delivering. So I won't go into the session and say, okay, we are talking about these people now, and this person's this, and that person's that. It will be about the topic of consent, because in our particular situation, we are both in faith and non-faith-based schools. So we reach a wide range of audience. So our main aim is reaching the young people, and that will be from whatever background you're from. As a parent, that's going to be a bit different from you on your side. So in terms of right to withdraw, if there is something that you are uncomfortable with, whatever across the spectrum that you're coming from and views that you may have, if it falls under the sex ed category, then you do have the right to withdraw your child. So that's a decision each parent would need to make for themselves.
And I suppose that brings into, like we've been discussing, why it is so important then to be having the conversations with our young people at home. If we are withdrawing them from certain aspects of the classroom, they're going to want to know why, or at least they're going to start looking into that topic more. If I think of my younger self, if I'm told we can't do something or that's off limits, a child's curiosity is going to spike further. So this speaks into, again, what we've been exploring, the importance of us having conversations at home, within families, within safe places, so that children can understand and navigate life, because these things are becoming more and more prevalent.
I would, if I may also add, I think gone are the days, if there ever were such days, where you can shield your child from all different influences. We are not blank canvases, so we are shaped by our context, our culture, societies, upbringing, families, and so forth, including the society that we are living in. So talking about those topics, I think, is important. And this one thing I encourage parents to remember is that they are the number one educator of their child. So it's up to them in terms of what values and what perspectives they want to instill into their child. So again, going back to the piece of why it's important for them to be speaking about these things. But also on top of that, I don't think hiding your child under a rock when it comes to these topics is also the way to go, because they will at some point be exposed to it, similar to another topic that we'll get into. But as soon as you give your child a phone, right, with internet on it, which was not the case when I was growing up, they have instantly got access now to the world. Okay, and even if your child doesn't have a phone, if they're around friends or people that they hang around with who don't, for example, share either the same worldview or from a different background, so they don't have the same perspective on things, they're again being exposed. You're not around your child 24 hours a day. They're spending most day in school for a number of people, not everyone, but for a number of people. So again, it's important for us to have these conversations with our young people so that they're aware about how to navigate the world that they live in, because they don't live in our world, they live in their world, and their world's kind of different from our world, even though we're in the same postcode. Just that difference in perspective. So it's important to speak about these things to our children.
And it's really helpful, like you've said to almost think about yourself as a child if you're an adult and remember what you were like. But also that question, Paul, you said about when we're talking to our young people, what values do you as a parent, as a carer, want to instill in them? And I think that is a really good place to start when it comes to that big question, which I want to ask either of you to answer. But how do we do it? How do we start these conversations around sex, relationships, when we may not feel like we've got all the answers?
Yeah. I mean, I'll speak just a couple of words, then if Catherine wants to add anything, she can add something as well. So the first thing I always say to parents is, your young person is possibly as nervous as what you are about having the conversation. So what you want to do is not set up the talk. So you don't want to say, little Susan, we are meeting up on a Wednesday at 6 p.m. We're going to speak for 1 hour and we're going to talk about sex. Okay. That just sets up, that's a recipe for disaster. What you want to do is you want to have loads of small little talks. Okay. So loads of small interactions around the topics as they come up. And one of the ways to do that is to seize natural opportunities. So you could be sitting down watching a program, right? And there's a romantic scene or something to do with a relationship. You can just ask, what do you think about these two couples dynamic here? Or how that person relates to that person, whether it's positive or negative. And you can just seize in those natural situations that arise. I've known parents to take their kids to the museum, okay, and they go through the anatomy of the body and they're just having a conversation with young people. I've got a 6-year-old daughter. She sometimes comes to me and tells me, Daddy, I just feel upset and I don't even know why I feel upset. So I'm just having those natural beginning conversations about how our bodies are changing and as we grow up. So it's about taking those natural opportunities that arise and seizing on those moments. Then the other thing I would tell parents to do is make sure it's a two-way conversation and not a one-way conversation. Because if it becomes a one-way conversation, then they're not going to naturally just come up and open up to you necessarily if all you're going to do is talk at them. There's a lot of things that they want to share as well with you. So it's about keeping those lines of communication open and not being judgmental, or, being visibly shocked at some of the questions they might ask you. You want them to ask you those questions. Okay, you are a safe source for them to ask those questions, and don't worry about not knowing everything. We don't know everything, and I've been doing this for the best part of 7 years, and I don't know everything there is. So it's totally okay not to know everything. The key is don't make it up. Just say, I don't know the answer to that, but I'm going to go and do some research, and I'll come back to you on that.
Really helpful. Thank you, Paul. Anything you want to add in, Catherine?
Yeah, I think just don't panic. I know I was in a primary school, and it was actually when I was doing my teaching degree, and it was when the guys came to look to see if you were a good teacher or not. And I was teaching about mini beasts and butterflies, like little 6-year-old kids. One kid sticks his hand up and says, Miss, can you tell me how to spell sex? Well, I just froze. I'm like, we're talking about butterflies. Why on earth do you want to talk about sex? And of course, it was, the kid that's always a little bit chopsy. But I managed to hold my own, and I was like, why do you want to spell sex? And he said, well, I can spell in, but I can't spell sex. And I was like, sex. Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you how to do that. So, it's a silly example, but I think sometimes we do just go, oh my goodness, I found a condom in their bag, or I've seen this message. Have a two-way conversation, Maybe they were doing plaster of Paris in condoms. I did it in college. My mother would have freaked with the number of condoms I had. But, we were making sculptures, and it's very strong and it worked very well. There might well be a plausible and reasonable explanation. And even if there isn't, don't freak. If your first thing is to go, what on earth are you doing? That is not going to make your child go, well, actually. So I think, one phrase that we use a lot is talk me through. So you can say, I was looking through your bag, or I found a condom in your pocket, or, I found this book, or I saw on your phone that there were these photos. Talk me through, and give them the chance, and make sure that before that happens, and it will happen at some point, you're going to see something that you wish you hadn't, or you wish they hadn't. So talk about it before. Say, we're all going to charge our phones downstairs. and all of you do it, live by example. The Bible says you can do what you want, but not everything is good for you. And that is so true. And I think part of the problem is that we think we have control over our children. We don't have control over our children. We can influence them. And up until about 8 or 10, we can do that really well. But once they get past 10, they are far more influenced by their peers, and they don't actually think that you know anything, which can be very frustrating. But if you can have that two-way conversation to say, listen, you're going to find some stuff out and you don't know what it is or whether it's right or wrong, or you're going to be concerned about it. I'd love it if you came and told me first, and we can find out together what it means. The same, with swear words. When you go to school, you come back, if you just shout at your kid and say, I can't believe you just said that, child probably doesn't know that it was bad. They've just picked it up in school. So you want to say, you're going to hear things, you're going to see things that we wouldn't do in this family. And this is why. So, let's have that conversation and set out what are your values? Why do you think that? And if you are a faith-based family, where do those values come from? This is what the Bible says. It's not me, it's what the Bible says. And God made us, so he knows what's best for us. So even though it would be great or would feel great when you're 16 to kiss anyone that you saw, might not be the best idea. And actually, research backs this up. And I think it's worth saying as well that, parents are concerned, and sometimes with good reason, but the government guidance is actually pretty good. And from a biblical viewpoint, from a faith-based viewpoint, from a research viewpoint, it says, marriage is a good thing. And statistically, you are more likely to stay together if you are married. We're fully inclusive when we teach in schools, so we ensure that everybody there feels accepted and valued and loved. Doesn't mean we agree with everything that they believe or the values that they hold, but it does mean that they will trust us and talk to us. And just because we're talking about something doesn't mean that we're celebrating it. We're just talking about it. There are things that exist in this world that are not good. And if you walk in and say, this is not good, like you say, immediately you're defensive, and maybe half the class is going, whoa, well, I've done that, so she doesn't like me. Whereas if you walk in and say, what do you think about the amount of porn that you can get on your phone? Or what do you think about the apps? Or what do you think about scrolling for 4 hours a day? I think you'll be very pleasantly surprised that the kids are as concerned as you are, sometimes more so.
That's really interesting, that thought that just talking about something doesn't mean we're celebrating it. And I think that's a really helpful way of approaching some of these very difficult topics that will come up, like you've already shared, whether we talk about them at home with our children or not. They're going to learn about them somewhere, which leads me into my next question around pornography, which we've touched upon briefly. It is a really difficult topic to broach. But as we've said, children are going to see it. You've actually done some research, I believe, Catherine, with dignify.org, another organisation that you are involved in, to look into how prevalent pornography is amongst children. And I'd love for you just to share some of the stats you've got, not to shock us, but to help us understand why we should then be talking about it.
Yeah, well, the average age that they start viewing porn is 12. But of children who viewed porn, 34% of them have seen it before they were 11. And the really shocking one is that 88% go back and view it again. So this is something, the kids are not necessarily looking for it. Like I say, if you've got Instagram or TikTok, it will just come up. And the way that those algorithms work is if you pause or hover, and let's face it, you're going to go, oh, what is that? That is a second too long. Or if it's something and it's a bit of a giggle and you open it up, your feed is going to be filled with more and more information. So yeah, Dignify do great work. They do surveys in schools, and they actually went in and they spoke to 15,000 young people, mostly from year 10 upwards, but some slightly younger as well. And 44% of them said that they observed sexual comments and remarks, now this is secondary school, at least weekly. And 22% had seen or observed rumours and comments about someone's sexual activity. And 23% again had received or sent a sexually worded text or social media message weekly. This is not something that is going away, but it is something that you can do about. And again, we don't walk into schools and say porn is wrong. If we're doing a porn lesson, we'll say, do you think that porn is a good way to learn about relationships and sex? And then that 44% of boys and 38% of girls who will have seen it by the time they're 14 can safely, without shame, go, yeah, I think it's a really good way, or no, it's not a really good way because it's all fake. But then we can continue that conversation and draw out of them, well, what's good about it? Is there anything real about it? So that by the end of the lesson, they understand that everyone that takes part in porn is an actor, and what they're doing isn't real, and what you're seeing actually isn't real because it's all edited and, photoshopped out. And actually, none of it is real. So you can't trust any of it. So if you think, oh, well, I know they like that because I've seen the women and they're smiling and saying yes, and then you say to them, so do you think that was acting? You can see them going, oh, well, yeah, I guess it might be. You say, well, it might take 2 or 3 hours to record 1 minute of film. Do you think it was real? Do you think it was happening at the time? Do you think the woman was really enjoying it, or the man was really enjoying it? And do you think that's a nice way to behave? And we know that 90% of porn, and this is mainstream porn, I'm not talking about going into the dark web, this is just what you can pull up online, is misogynistic and violent and racist. And that is, if you go on to a porn site, on the first page, those are the photographs and videos that you're going to see. So that is, if your young person happens to click on something, that is what they're going to see. But I mean, pleasingly, 42% of the female respondents and 30% of the males said that something should be done to stop them just coming across it. And yeah, if you talk to a young person, that you'll find that the same thing. But initially, like I say, they might just happen upon it, or they might be going in for a bit of a giggle, or they might be trying to find out an answer to a question, and that's what comes up. But 88% go back there. And the thing with porn is it's addictive. It's just as it gives you those endorphin rushes, just the same as taking drugs or alcohol. And we know how difficult they are to stop. Once you've had a drink or got drunk and you got that nice feeling, you go back for more. And children's brains aren't fully formed. They don't understand the consequences of their actions. In porn, there are no consequences of your actions. You don't see anyone the next day getting pregnant. You don't see them waiting outside the STI clinic to see if they've caught something. And also, you don't see the positive side. You don't see the nice intimate conversation at breakfast, or the loving relationship that should go along with a positive sexual encounter. And so it's really, really, really important for you to be talking to your children and saying, there's going to be some pictures that you don't want to see and you shouldn't see because it's going to upset you or it's going to hurt you. And you're going to believe that is normal when it's not. Now, is anyone in school already looking at things, or have you seen something that you thought probably wasn't quite right? And again, it's not getting cross with them saying, what is this doing on your phone? It's saying, talk me through, where did this come from? And the problem is, once you've got it in your feed, it's really difficult to get rid of because it just keeps pushing. You can help them with that. And I think the key thing is, lots of people say, ban mobile phones and things, but actually it's a bit like, you don't take your 6-year-old into the pub or leave a can of beer on the table next to them and expect them not to have a sip or a sniff or try it out. And you don't have any control over what they're seeing. So you almost have to say to them, listen, there's going to be some stuff. And it might not be pictures. It might be videos. It might be what you read that actually isn't good for you. And it's not just not good for you. It's actually harmful. And it is going to harm you. And you might think it's fine, just like when you have your first sip of alcohol, or even when you get your first high from a drug, you think, well, this is fine, I'm still in control. But it will take over everything. And it makes, porn is so, it promises everything that it doesn't deliver. It makes you dissatisfied with your own body, with your partner's body, with the relationship that you're in, because you're constantly comparing it to something that isn't real. And when we have these conversations with kids, and again, this isn't something that we teach, we don't go in, so don't worry, parents, we're not going in and saying, having a big discussion about porn, but we are making children aware that there's stuff online that you might not want to see, and they will bring up, well, I've seen this or I've seen that. And then you can talk about it and say, well, what did you think? Do you think it's a good portrayal of, are all women like that? Are all men like that? I mean, Paul, do you want to say about your conversation recently with it, all men are bad?
Yeah. So I think what porn does as well, on top of what Catherine said, is that it distorts the very reality of sex. And for many young people, so I speak to a group of young men, or I've spoken to a group of young men over the years, many different young men, and they are saying things that they think is common in real life relationships, which is very common in pornography, but not common in real life relationships. So then what happens then is when they go out into the real world, they're taking the world of pornography with them. So when they're entering into their relationships, they think, oh yeah, this is how things should be done. This is everything I see on pornography, it always ends like this, or this always happens, and then this happens. And that's not really how it works. So porn is, a lot of porn that young people are coming across, as Catherine said, it's made by men and for men. So it's through the male gaze as well. Women tend to be the object of male desire within that as well. So yeah, we have to be aware of this. So I mean, in a school context, I remember teaching a group of young year sevens it was, and the teacher said to me, the principal said to me, can you tackle the issue of pornography? Now, we don't normally tackle the issue of pornography until around year 9, 10, right? Unless we have something called the age of exposure. So we have an appropriate age for certain content, but then also we have the age of exposure. So if they've been exposed to something early, it makes no sense us putting it off for 3, 4 more years if they're already engaging in it there and then. So we tend to attack it then. So I obviously didn't add 2 and 2 together until I started to go through the materials of what we're going to be discussing. And I started thinking to myself, this is a bit much for a group of year sevens. But as we start the conversation, it became very evident and clear why the assistant principal wanted us to tackle that issue. Because some of their views of sex had clearly been influenced by the world of pornography. And it seemed to be quite class-wide. Because we had a group of girls who said that they, who said, in front of everybody in the class, about 4 or 5 of them. So year sevens, for those of you who may not know ages when it comes to year sevens, that's like 10, 11 or 11, okay, around that age. And they said, sir, we are expected to be choked in our first sexual contact that we have. And I remember just stopping and thinking, wow, you're year 7, you're 11, and so just to be clear, they weren't expressing necessarily that that's what they wanted to happen, but that had become some sort of expectation. And the other thing I'll say is, well, neither doesn't mean that they are watching that type of pornography, but from pornography or from whatever source that's coming from, that's entered into their environment and has set up a particular expectation of what sex is likely to be like, or things that are going to be involved within the sexual experience. So, that is the world and some young people's world that they're navigating and living in. And this is why it's important as adults, parents, as well as schools, that we're talking about the distortion that porn can have regarding sex. And I just want to assure parents as well that the RSC guidance right now does talk about schools should be getting across the message that children, young people of secondary school age should be delaying their sexual experiences. That is part of the guidance, delaying sex. So that is a message that we try and get across. Okay. So all the information given should be positioned in a way that's talking about their future selves, so that when that time, if or when that time comes in the future, they are able to make the best decisions for themselves and the healthiest choices for themselves. So nothing should be positioned, whether you're talking about pornography, whether you're talking about consent, whether you're talking about contraceptives or anything like that, it shouldn't really be positioned as encouraging them to engage in that, to have sexual contact now or at their age.
And we try and get
one
them
more thing
to tell us that. So like when we do contraception, I really enjoy this lesson anyway, we get them to design a form of contraception. So we don't go and say this chemical methods or barrier methods. We go in and say, okay, this is the biology of, how the sperm gets to the egg. What can you come up with in your little group to stop it happening so that we're not going to get pregnant and, maybe we're not going to catch those diseases either. And they will come up with all sorts of amazing, wonderful sieves with razor blades and all sorts of stuff. And we'll say, this is a barrier method. This is a chemical method. We say, is there anything that would be 100%, foolproof? We say, condoms about 99%. Is there anything? And eventually, sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but eventually someone will say, well, you could just not have sex. Like, wow. Yeah. Well done, Saeed. You could just not have sex. Not have sex ever, but you could not have sex right now, and that would be easy, wouldn't it? That would make life much easier, and you'd get to know the person a bit more, and and so it is that critical thinking of getting them to come up with the idea, because when we leave, they're going to be talking to their friends again or watching TV. So we've got to get them to keep thinking, is this true? Is this real? Is this in line with my values? Is this what I want, in 10 years' time to look back and say, yeah, that was 15-year-old me, and just get them to think of that, because they can and they will, but you've got to give them those scenarios and give them that opportunity to think, what would I do in that situation? What would I do if I saw this happening, or someone was trying to pressure me to do something, or I saw someone pressuring my friend? What would I say or do, or, how could I get involved?
Helping our young people to think for themselves and trusting them that they will be able to make decisions through our guidance that will be healthy. That's part of this whole conversation. Just want to touch upon another area around particularly pornography, but, sex education. We're talking about questions, what they're seeing, but there is a lot of emotion attached to this, hormones. And I think of myself as a teenager and my raging hormones. And there'll be things that will be seen, will be experienced, and there'll be a feeling attached to them. There'll be a desire, a stirring even in a young person that they may not understand. And I suppose that's another area that, whether that's happened or not, it is important to address, because if we don't, shame can be something then that the child is dealing with. And I know shame can be something that means we close up, and we may have these conversations that come later. Paul, you mentioned that shocking story of the year 7s knowing about choking. And I suppose if we are having these conversations age appropriately, but early on, preparing them, then we may be able to make sure that shame doesn't become a shield that can lead to then maybe issues later on.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, one thing I'll say about, speaking about hormones and desire and things like this, I think what we want to do as Christians is not be anti-sex, because God isn't anti-sex. So I put it this way, right? My 7-year-old, my daughter, I'm guessing my son as well, they will love to get in front of our car and drive it down the road, right? They'll love to do that. That desire isn't bad, but doing it right now may be a bit dangerous for them, okay? It isn't the appropriate timing. So what we teach, when we're teaching about puberty, we don't only talk about, emotional changes and acne and growth spurts and all these other things. We also talk about sexual desire. So what we say to them is, right now, or maybe a few years ago for some of them, depending on what stage they're at, because everyone starts it and different things happen at different times, different people. You see that person that you like to arm wrestle and play rough and tumble with? You may now all of a sudden look at them in a different light, okay? You may begin to get some feelings for them or desire them in a particular way, okay? That is natural and that is normal for you to start developing. As you grow older, a sexual desire for people, that's what some people are going to develop, okay? When you start developing those sexual desires, number one, we should know that that's normal, and that happens to many people, okay? So there's nothing to be ashamed of. It doesn't mean you have to live out or act upon those desires, okay? And the reason why we're saying that we're not being, we're not trying to dampen down your fun, but we're trying to look out for you and make sure that you're enjoying whatever it is, within its right context. So going back to the driving analogy, there's a reason why we don't let primary school age kids drive cars, okay? It's not that driving a car is bad, But if they do it at their age, it's not going to have good outcomes. And it's the same thing with sex and sexual desire. Until I get a bit older, get more mature, grow into my body more, and be able to understand how to drive the car, being taught, take my driving lessons, and now all of a sudden when I drive the car, it's a much more beneficial experience. Same thing with sex. So I always have the thing where I say, within the church context, I say, sex is not God, sex is not bad, but sex is good. And we must do it within its right context. That's where we fully appreciate it and get the best experience out of it as God intended.
It's really helpful advice there. Catherine, anything as we draw our time to a close you want to add around empowering parents, carers listening, grandparents who are wanting to navigate this journey but feeling a bit nervous still about broaching the subject, but aware we live in a very sexualized culture and this conversation is important?
I think ask questions, especially if you're a grandparent. Times have changed dramatically since I was a kid. If you're in your 70s and 80s, even more so. So ask them, what do you enjoy? Who are your friends? What do you do together? What are you looking at on your phone? Show me how this works. And be genuinely interested in their point of view. And again, don't shut them down. Just because you don't understand, when people say, I don't understand why they do that, they need to listen to what they're saying. They're saying, I don't understand why they would do that. Well, an easy way to work out the answer is to talk to them and say, I don't understand why you do that. Can you explain to me why you think that's a good idea or why you think that's hilarious, and have those conversations and don't be scared. And if you make a mistake, that's fine. We all do. And say to the kids, I don't really want to talk to you about this, but I think probably I should. I noticed yesterday you were doing such and such, and it just doesn't seem the right thing to do for me. So can you talk me through it? But I think making sure it's a two-way conversation, not being scared, being completely honest, like Paul said, say, I don't know the answer to that, but, let's look up where we can find out the answer so that they can see where to get, if you're looking for answers about health, go to the NHS website, don't go to TikTok with someone in a white coat telling you, you need to eat, half a ton of chocolate, that'll make you feel better. Yeah, it'll make you feel great, but it'll have significant side effects. So, make sure that you are signposting them to good places, and know, especially if you run a youth group or if you're a teacher in a school, have those signposts on the wall. They're not going to talk to you, possibly, if you're not a safe space and you haven't been a good person to talk to before. But make sure you've got posters up in your toilets or on the wall, or that you say to your children, do you know this phone number, this clinic, these are people who will help you if you've got questions. And just be approachable, be kind, mostly be kind. Because children are still finding out the answers. They don't know fully what they think yet. And you can be a big part in informing those opinions.
And if I could add one last thing on what Catherine said, we don't always say this to parents, but talking to parents and grandparents and other adults in young people's lives is try to embody to the best of your ability the ethic that you're speaking or you're trying to get across to a young person. Because young people, as well as people, we tend to respect and follow people who lead by example. So it's not just what we're telling them, but making sure that we're doing our best to embody it, however imperfectly that may be. If they see that we're trying to embody that particular sexual ethic, then they're more likely to follow it. If they see that we're not embodying it, it's like sometimes, I see adults and, my wife's a teacher, and it's like the young people are swearing, and they're telling off their young person for swearing in school, but they're using the same language at home quite regularly around them. So there's a disconnect with what you're telling them not to do, but you're doing it so freely. So if we're giving them a sexual ethic to live up to, or trying to encourage them to live up to that, then we need to be striving to do that ourselves too.
I know it's a helpful quote I've learned. Children don't do what we say, they do what we do.
Do what we do, yeah.
Yeah. And I know you've got loads of helpful resources on your website as well for parents, obviously educators as well. ACET-UK.com, ACET-UK.com. One final question. I asked you, what is your advice for parents in terms of discussing these topics? But what about children who are like, no, we're not going here. I've got nothing to say on this. I don't want to have this conversation. you're going to hit a brick wall if you bring this up, mum or dad or carer. How do you get that wall down?
I would say in many instances, the child doesn't want to open up about it or talk about it because there's either a history of behavior or there's some kind of conditioning that either yourself or them have kind of over the years curated, and now it's kind of like set in stone. So there tends to be something behind it. Because right now, my daughter will talk to me about literally anything, right? And depending on how I then, the environment I begin to nurture and create, that's either going to be consistent as she grows up, or it's going to hit a brick wall sometimes. So I think we need to be honest and ask ourselves questions as well first. Am I behaving or doing anything, or have I reacted to anything in a certain way, which is blocking them now from speaking to me about this situation? Am I squirmish or squeamish, which a lot of us maybe are? Have I given off that sex is something to be embarrassed about? And therefore having a conversation with mum or dad about sex is an embarrassing thing. Have I given off that impression sometimes? So there's it tends to be, I would say in many instances, there's a way that I have behaved or unknowingly or knowingly that has caused these conditions within my dynamic with my young person on this particular topic. But there is hope, of course. So how do I now slowly begin to rebuild that bridge? How do I construct a new bridge so that, the young child can walk across and he'd be able to come to me on the other side of the bridge? And that may take time. It's going to take patience, and it's going to take some self-evaluation about how approachable am I? Am I making myself approachable? Or am I a place of judgment and punishment primarily, rather than a place of healing and advice and of nurture and guidance?
And that speaks into what you said about embodying the ethic that you want to teach your children, isn't it? That reflection for ourselves as adults, as well as being bold to go into these conversations with our young people. Yeah. We've been hearing much of your wisdom and advice around how we broach these challenging topics. Catherine, I know that you are passionate about resourcing educators, but also parents and carers. If someone listening is thinking, I want to learn more, I want to equip myself more so I can have this conversation, what exactly do you offer?
Well, I think if they just get in contact with us and say, listen, I've got a group of friends or some family, or I'd like to be involved in a online discussion of how do I do this better and get some top tips. We run those. We run parent sessions where we'll give you scenarios. What would you do in this situation, to talk through in a breakout room or with your friends? And I mean, if you live close to us, we'll actually come out to you and just have a few of those scenarios, because often we're caught off guard. The child comes up and asks us something, we're like, oh my goodness, and you're just like, no, shut down, stop, no, we don't do that, that's just, no, we're not talking about it. Where actually, if we'd thought about it beforehand, we can think, okay, what did I do when I was in that session? Oh yeah, we counted to 10, we thought about it, we got the context first. Remember what I said about the in and the sex, we didn't jump to conclusions that this is where they were going. We asked them for the context, and then we got them to talk it through, and it was a two-way thing, and I didn't know all the answers, but that was okay. We went and we looked it up together, and we found some good places. And again, with the signposting, have you got a list of telephone numbers that this is what happens if somebody comes to you and says, well, actually, I think so-and-so is being abused. Do you know where to go? Or would you have to go and look it up as well? And I think at the end of the day, you've got to think, do you want commitment from your child, or do you want compliance? Because if you hold a gun to a child's head or just shout at them or give them one of your looks, you can get them to do anything that you want whilst you're in the room. But as soon as you walk out, they'll do what they want. So you want to get commitment. So you don't want to be getting them to comply out of fear or obligation or guilt. You want them to do it because they believe that it's the best thing. And that comes from you showing them that, this is how we work, this is what we do, and this is the best thing for you.
So much more we could cover, but time has quickly come to an end for this week's Life Issues. But I want to say a massive thank you to both of you. Paul Semakula, ACET UK Schools Worker and Training Coordinator for London and the South, and Catherine Healey, Chief Executive of ACET UK, ACET-UK.com, where you can explore more about what we've been talking about and find those resources that really do shine a light to help us equip us in having these conversations and realising there is not as much to fear as we may think. Thank you both for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.